Whether you're talking about a good shave or talking about hair dye, whatever it may be, there's lots of grooming advice that wrestling fans can use. And on the topic of advice, Jim, a lot of the listeners have been sending it in this morning. Dave Meltzer apparently did not react well to the segment you just reviewed.
I think instead of hair dye, I think he's gone straight to some type of chemical that's seeping into his skull. Poor old Uncle Dave had to, and of course, he didn't want to come out and take the approach that I just did moments ago when we were talking about the interview with Darby Allin and the Buckaroos and how stupid it was to tell the truth about the company, which is why people don't like it. He had to chastise the kids, but he couldn't come out and say that it was because he was mad because they were telling the truth. He was mad because they didn't follow up on that really great angle. He said, well, when he left was he there live? Didn't he say when he left the building last week or when the show was over or whatever, he thought, wow, that was a great angle. And then they didn't follow up on it. And of course they didn't. We just said they didn't, but his bone of contention as to why it was a bad promo was just that they didn't follow up on it, not that they did the exact opposite of what they should have done and told the truth about their company. He can't admit that part, that it's the truth. So he had to say, they used the Cornette vernacular. That's the stuff that Cornette says. Yeah, that truthiness stuff. But he did say that in some way they were trying to make me the babyface. And I kind of already am to normal people. But if, Dave, by your own logic, then if they were trying to make me the babyface with this, babyfaces tell the truth, right? So if Darby was trying to make me the babyface by telling the truth about then doesn't that mean that Dave agrees with me? Brian, help me. I may be under the influence of cold medication.
Dave seemed to have two big problems. One, the lack of proper follow-up to what he perceived or what other fans may have thought was a hot angle. It was certainly an attempt for one, and there was certainly very little follow-up that was appropriate. The other problem he had was the idea that Darby went out there in the promo, didn't really cite any of those things last week, instead did a promo telling the truth about behind-the-scenes stuff, using Jim Cornette vernacular.
And he did recognize also that it's not a thing that they would have wanted to, and what else would you expect to have Cody's name chanted on their television program? He obviously cited that.
Yeah, the problem is Dave is one of the few people still hanging on to not really reporting the truth about what happens behind the scenes in AEW and the personality conflicts, who's causing the problems, the root of problems. And in that world, the Young Bucks are the eternal baby faces. Kenny Omega's a saint. And for anyone, even in character or on a wrestling show, to use any of the real stuff against them is really bad because all the other stuff has worked so well. No, I think there's a lot of people who hyped up the Young Bucks and they deserved a lot of credit for what they were able to do for their business on the indies. And since the beginning of AEW, it would be near impossible for someone to convince me that they have been of value for the money they're getting and for the effort they put forth into anything that isn't what they wanted to do to begin with.
I think you'd be hard pressed to convince me they've been worth a lot less than the money they've been given. And again, we're not gonna beat them up again because we're beating Dave up here. He's actually had to come out, and this is, I think, the sternest. You could tell he was kind of pissed. He was like a disappointed father if that father had a real stick up his ass and wasn't going to allow any kind of shenanigans from his kids. But he's pissed that they can't get their shit together. And even he knows now that they're not getting it together and that they need to get it together. And he's watching them in real time lose more grip of it instead of getting it together.
There have been so many bad moments and bad matches and bad angles and promos in AEW, a lot of Jericho shit, that Dave never properly called out. The way he, and I said properly called out, the way he would have called out anything bad on any wrestling show up until the advent of AEW. Never called out any of it. There was,
remember
there was
Jericho and Takeshita. See, I don't want you getting mad at me.
4.25 stars.
Well, I thought it was 4.5.
No, 4.25. It wasn't up to 4.5 standards. It was 4.25.
Okay. So, yeah, that TV match where poor Takeshita had to slow down for Jericho so he wouldn't, fucking have a stroke is better than Flair and Steamboat.
So Dave's frustration comes from the fact that, this is the group of people that would listen to him and be hypersensitive to the Dave comments and narrative more than anyone else. And he has, in his weird attempts at tough love, made other comments about things, whether it's Tony's booking or anything else. But he never goes full blast like he would at WWE in the past or, again, any other company ever. AEW has gotten a pass on that. The frustration you saw is someone who realizes he can't keep up this fight. You can't keep insisting that the shit in front of you isn't shit. You can't keep hoping, well, maybe it'll turn into a different kind of shit. Maybe a mushroom will come out of the shit. No, it's shit.
Maybe it's just poorly made chocolate pudding.
Who thought they were going to ever do, whether it's the Young Bucks or anyone in that company, who thought they were going to do a hot angle and follow it up well the next week? What in AEW history, other than Punk and MJF, what in AEW history has ever told you week to week storyline building and following up with the appropriate seriousness for top angles was a thing they were going to do? They've never done that. They've never succeeded at that. They've always failed at that. And now it happened with his favorites. And in the midst of this, they're being slapped in the face with the reality that a lot of people want to pretend isn't there. That's why Dave reacted the way he did.
He was indignant. He was indignant that these things should be said out loud. These are the things that should never... Well, yeah, I agree with you, Dave. They should never be said out loud on their own television show because they're the truth. They did call attention to many of the problems. They called attention to probably, when we find out, however many years down the road, why Cody decided to depart when he did, because he saw in some fashion what was going on with these people, and he saw he was capable of more. Well, we just don't know the exact...
With Cody, not to take away from any of the drama and behind-the-scenes shit between him and the Elite, or him and his camp and Omega, whoever it may be, at the end of the day, it was Tony Khan and Cody having an issue. But all those things led up to it.
Yes, and I'm pretty sure it was, that it was the direction that everything was going, that Cody could see, well, what the fuck? I've staked a lot on this. And Tony's the guy that ultimately is steering the ship. But nevertheless, so that's, Dave, I'm glad we agree on something finally after all this time about AEW. I'm sorry it has to be that your best friends are douchebags, but I agree with you. No, they shouldn't have said any of those things, and they shouldn't have handled this that way, because all it did was make the company look bad. And they seem to be able to do that pretty much once a week for the last couple months in some fashion or another, make their own selves look bad.
Sorry it didn't work, Dave. You wrote an obituary for Jim. You tried to write him off. You said he was out of touch. You said that anyone who's not with his new stuff, specifically the Buck stuff and Omega, is out of touch. It's years later now. Who's out of touch and with who? How many Observer readers didn't resubscribe when the print edition stopped? Who's out of touch?
How many of our YouTube clips do higher numbers than their goddamn Saturday night national cable shows?
Yeah, you lost. You lost the argument. Everything you thought you were advocating for failed. Just man up to it. Own up to it. The Bucks weren't the right people for this.
But he doesn't have to, but it's not his fault. It's not his fault they suck. It's just his fault that he won't honestly say they suck. He doesn't have to man up to anything. He just has to say, you know what? They had a lot of potential, but this shit went south, and Tony's not a booker or a leader, and these guys aren't mainstream talent and whatever. Be critical and observe it like a journalist.
But we even saw this last week with that story we did about Chris Jericho being the highest paid person in AEW. Dave's argument was, Chris Jericho's the highest paid person there. He shouldn't be doing jobs that mean nothing to people like, specifically in this case, Takeshita.
Oof.
My argument would be Dave should be saying, why the fuck is Tony Khan paying Chris Jericho more than everyone else? How is this justified based on the work? And, oh my God, the years of future television we have while this contract plays out.
Well, and Dave didn't say anything incorrect. He applied it in an incorrect fashion. Nobody should be doing meaningless jobs. If it doesn't have some meaning somewhere in the scheme of things, why even have the fucking match to begin with? And it wasn't a meaningless job to put over a guy like Takeshita. The way they did it and the fucking presentation of it and the television show it was in or the build to it or whatever, that can all be called into question. But to do it, that he probably is one of the handful of guys that Jericho should put over. Because it's building, because he's 52. I know he signed a 10-year contract. But does anybody want to see Jericho when he's 58 wrestling on television? So the point is, he ain't going to get any more over than he is right now, Jericho. And he's been more over than he is right now in the past. But it's not going to put him over or get him over anymore to win matches. He doesn't need to lose to everybody, because then it devalues a guy that can put a few people over and make it mean something. But how are you going to have a fucking program with anybody at a main event level if somebody doesn't beat Jericho so Jericho can come back and beat them? It doesn't make any sense.
And for those diehard Observer supporters, and not everyone who reads it is crazy. I mean, you hear about people on that message board, then you go look, and it's just the craziest of people. And those are the moderators. Just the wimpiest of fans. But you say things are out of touch. You try to point things out. How's the Observer business doing? You know, for anyone who wants to say, you guys need AEW, check the numbers and the downloads and get back to me. They need us more than we need AEW. Dave needs AEW. Dave doubled down on AEW the same way he did UFC when he thought WWE would be a monopoly forever and he may run out of things to cover. So whenever anyone wants to look at the reasoning behind things, the motivation behind things, Dave Meltzer needs AEW. We don't. And because of that, there's a level of protection there that you're not going to get here.
It sounds like a condom commercial.